All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Design for Drupal. Nothing like a little parking drama to start the day. So this is SVG, easy as 1, 2, 3. This is going to be an introductory overview of SVG. There's a lot that you can do with SVG that I'm not really going to get into. And it's kind of a rabbit hole once you really dive into it. So I just want to give you the basics and come away from this session feeling comfortable working with SVG files and using them, especially with Drupal. So I'm going to start by explaining what SVG is. Maybe the easiest way to do that is to start by explaining what it is not. So I think you're all familiar with bitmap images, like this PNG file. It was a 16 by 16 pixel PNG file that was blown up, scaled to 320 by 320, so 20 times the size, right within the web browser. So this is actually Chrome that's running. And you can see that it's pretty fuzzy, low resolution. Chrome is actually interpolating the pixels, and if I just kind of show you what that image really is, you can see that it's a grid of individual pixels, right? And each pixel has a color value or an alpha channel, so there's some transparency coming through. And that's the grid of pixels, and that's what a bitmap or a raster image is made of. Uh-oh. So we may have some display issues with the external screen. I think I'm going to need, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. This is not what it's supposed to look like. It's like this screen doesn't look right.
This one's working okay. Actually, the mic.
Connection.
Did I touch this? Oh, there you go. Maybe that's just a short.
I think it's just a crappy connection.
Okay, good. The mic's okay? Yeah, all right. So, PNG files, JPEG files, GIFs, you're all used to them. And it's kind of retro, kind of got that quality going, 16-bit. And so pretty cool. When we take that same image and put it, build it with an SVG file, we can see it's actually perfectly crisp. It's rendering this mushroom cap and the edges here without that anti-aliasing within the different pixels. And that means that on different displays, high-resolution screens, Retina, iOS devices, you get that exact rendering of the image. It's using a set of instructions to actually display it from markup language instead of trying to interpolate this map of pixels. So doesn't have that retro vibe, right? But still pretty cool. But actually, have you all ever seen this game, by any chance? Does this look familiar? No. Tempest. It's like one of the best games ever made. How about this one? You got to know this one, right? All right. I don't know if you can see down at the bottom. Asteroids was released in 1979. So this is actually a vector-based game with a vector monitor. It doesn't have like fill color within the asteroids and spaceships and stuff, but it's rendering the same kind of stuff as it's vector graphic based. So vectors can be retro too. And actually SVG goes back quite a ways in terms of when it really started and came to be on the web. The spec was first started in 1998, and it's the world Wide Web Consortium. This is an open standard, just like HTML and CSS. And then in 2001, the first version was released and iterated, and then in 2003, SVG 1.1 was released. And that's the version we're still using today for all our graphics. And then there was an 8-year interval, and one thing that happened in that interval was the demise of Macromedia and Adobe Flash, which coincides with the rise of SVG, coincidentally. Also, in 2011, SVG support was added to Internet Explorer on IE9. And IE8 has been deprecated in, I don't remember the exact date, but January of this year. So if you still have to support SVG, or if you have to support these graphics in older browsers, I'll talk about that a little bit. But you can see, if, for all these slides, by the way, there's links at the bottom you can go to reference, and I'll have the URL for the slide deck. You can use all these to get access to the resources. Well, you can see the browser support for SVG there. So why would you want to use SVG rather than other kinds of images, especially when you have like the picture element now and source set sizes for responsive images solutions? Well, SVG, you can use just one image and get, you have a smaller file size for that image, depending on how it's constructed, because it's just made of text. It's a text file. Actually, that makes me think of a good bullet here, which is you can see diffs in Git when you make changes to an SVG, and that could be something that's useful in development as well. And then it scales without that anti-alias pixelation that you see, that I demonstrated earlier. You can also do really interesting things with it with web applications where and the end user in the client browser can actually modify the SVG, and you can get some really interactive kind of behaviors with that. Or as a developer, you can go in and tweak an SVG file right in your browser with developer tools, Firebug. They're also relatively easy to maintain. They're open standard, and depending on how you set them up, people can open them and reuse them. The document object model is available to JavaScript for interactive, like I said earlier, interactive kind of behaviors, and animation as well. They're kind of an inherently accessible medium. There's some special things that you might want to add. I'll talk about that later too. They're also translatable because they have text built into them that you could have them translate into different languages. That's something that would require some extra server-side rendering to do with bitmap images. And they also can be exposed to search engines, again, because they're text files. And so on that point about maintainability, I think there was this transition a couple years ago, moving away from icon fonts. So using a font library to manage icons. SVG is a lot easier to maintain than, I think we're good now. Yeah, okay. Than using a whole icon library, because you have to, if you need to modify or add an icon to that library, you have to rebuild the entire font, whereas with an SVG image, you could just re-add that image and then recompile it and deploy it. And there's a great article on csstricks.com, icon fonts versus SVG cage match, and you can decide the outcome. So that said, there are also good reasons not to use SVG, especially with like photos where you have really complex gradients that where having those pixels with different colors is really representative of what you're trying to depict. And even more complicated vector art, where you start to have like thousands and thousands of polygons, you may better be off using a JPEG or a PNG for that. And for animations, if you're really trying to get high frames per second or doing a lot of kind of complex interactivity in like a bounded area, then you're probably better off using a canvas element. Flipboard kind of had some controversy a year maybe it was a year ago, when they switched to the canvas element to do their kind of magazine layout, which is, it's got this beautiful scrolling kind of, I don't know, kind of a parallax thing going. But they decided that they wanted 60 frames per second to render that. Google Maps is done with Canvas. Yeah, so also if you're uploading images to Drupal using SVG, you're going to run into issues if you're trying to re-render those images at different aspect ratios or apply image style actions. It's not really compatible because it's sort of a different form. So I want to get into what an SVG file structure looks like and get you comfortable. You could even go right into a text file and build something like this. So start with the SVG element, pretty straightforward. You have an opening and closing tag, just like any other HTML markup. And then you want to add this XML namespace reference. This is actually not necessary if you're embedding these inline and you have the HTML5 doc type defined. I'll come back to that point, but otherwise, as an external file, you want to have it. Another really critical element is, or attribute, I should say, is the viewbox. And Sarah Sueden, who is really kind of one of the big, maybe the most important leader, thought leader or whatever, on SVG, has a great overview, really in depth, of working with the SVG viewbox. What you have here is basically the definition of the grid. It's like the window of which you look onto that SVG. And you can edit that viewbox and get some kind of interesting effects by changing that, having it zoom in and zoom out on the actual art contained within it. But so it sort of defines that window grid system. Then you have presentation attributes. In this case, height and width, and looks like any image element. Pretty straightforward. Then within that SVG element, you will have all kinds of other elements, and this, in particular, we have the path and the rectangle elements defined here. And on that path, you can see these instructions for drawing a shape. The path element is basically a polygon or like a curvy line. And then you will have more presentation attributes on those elements inside the SVG. Here we have fill, stroke, stroke width. So attributes that don't come in the CSS specification. That said, so actually that SVG right there is rendering this mushroom, right? So you have this top part and the bottom part, the polygon and the rectangle below it. But you can also put CSS classes, inline styles, and IDs. IDs are pretty standard on SVG elements. So here we have an ID of mushroom and also a class of mushroom on the SVG element. And then inside on those shape elements, we have, it's using the BEM syntax for CSS, but you can see that we have a mushroom cap and a mushroom stalk. And also we have an inline style just right over here, okay? That's overriding, this is just for demonstration. You shouldn't write CSS actually like this, but you can see that that inline style is going to take precedence and it's going to override those presentation attributes. So it's changing that color from that fill up here it's basically red, but that attribute, and then changing it to bright, just pure green. So There are a bunch of applications for actually creating SVG files. You could do it right in a text editor, but that's kind of best left to machines. Adobe Illustrator is the bless you. Adobe Illustrator is I think the go-to, and it's really powerful and probably produces the cleanest markup for using those SVG files for more complicated animations. There's a great blog post on like all the details of exporting. I want to just do like a quick example of working with an SVG. So Adobe Illustrator to export to SVG. So you can see that in Illustrator you have that bounding the artboard, this white rectangle around it. There is a option in Illustrator to say, okay, I want to fit my artboard to the artwork bounds, and that just automatically shapes it. And that's going to actually determine your view box, right? So I just set the view box to match up with the contained shape elements here. And then, let's see. Over here in my layers, you can see that? I have, so the rectangle was before, but here it's a path, so it kind of loses that semanticness. But you can see that you can put names on these layers, and then I can go just save as, and I'm going to choose SVG. If you choose this use artboards option, that can be useful for spriting, so exporting multiple SVG files from a single Illustrator file. So that's where that can be really powerful, but it's not really necessary for a single SVG. And then you get this dialog here. So you want to use SVG 1.1, the current spec. I want to use the system fonts. There is an option if you have text to render the text as an SVG path, which can be useful if you don't want to actually have that font embedded in the document or in the web page. You want to choose a link for the image location. You have a few options for how your color values and like the fill attribute get created. So you can use presentation attributes or CSS styles. That sort of depends on what you're trying to do with it. I'll choose presentation attributes for now. The decimal places are going to determine the number of points on the paths. And in most cases, 1 should be sufficient, but if you need higher precision, you could change that. And that's also for the view box. So you also want to have fewer T-span elements. You can use text box, test path for text. Don't check responsive, even if you're using the SVG on a responsive website. It's a little counterintuitive. I'll explain why in a little bit. And then we can just, you could actually preview the code right in this dialog right here. And that's what we've generated. And you can also see that there's some extra junk that Illustrator adds. I think so. Well, you know what? I'm going to come back to this, but can you see that? Okay, so that's just the preview in Illustrator. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Did I save it? Yes. Okay. All right, so that's Illustrator. Another application that's gotten really kind of the new hotness is Sketch, and I really like working in Sketch too. The one thing about Sketch is that the markup is a lot noisier, but it's got a nice kind of UI. So this is some like shapes to start with, and I was going to show just like how you would actually build something like that mushroom here. So I started with, we've got this oval. Oops, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to give it a more semantic name. So that's the mushroom cap, and then the rectangle is going to be the mushroom stock. You can see it has this grouping right here. And I want to convert this. So it was an ellipse before. I'm going to edit this with a pen here. So right now it's I got the kind of the curve pen. Spacing on what the name of this is, but I can go in and change the paths here and reshape. Oops. There, disconnected. That's what I want to do. And the nice thing about these applications is you get a lot of guides for how they line up. You can see right there. And delete. Oops. There we go. There's the semicircle mushroom cap. And I'll just, of course, with demos, they're always a little itchy. Select and align. There we go. Now, Sketch has a nice tool right here. You can pop it up. You could export that to a PNG or a JPEG if I wanted. And right here, I can just export it. So. And I'm going to rename that one that I exported from Illustrator too. There we go. So I can differentiate those. Okay, so that's what Sketch looks like. Inkscape is an open source application and cross-platform. Oh, I'm actually not totally sure. Maybe they're not open source, but it's a cross-platform. It is open source? Okay, cool. Yeah, okay, cool. I used it a while ago. It was kind of fidgety on a Mac, so I haven't used it in a while. But it's definitely useful, especially if maybe on a Linux machine. Try that out, or a Windows box maybe. There's also another editor called SVG Edit, which is definitely open source. This is actually hosted right on GitHub. And they have an online editor you can play around with. I have to pop out of here. Right, so I would just use this more for like a tutorial and practice because like working with those shapes is really awkward sometimes. But it does have like a nice, cool back and forth between the export and tries to be pretty faithful to the SVG spec. And you can do things like go in and edit this directly. And, well, couldn't really see that. I'll do that again so you can see a little better. So this is a red outlined triangle. Where is Phil? That was Sam's drop. Okay, green. So that's kind of cool. And you could also install it locally and try it there. There was also a Drupal module that I think tried to integrate this on Drupal sites so you could have the editor. I don't know, maybe that could be useful for a project. There's also kind of a new kid on the block, Figma.com, which is software as a service. It's going to be released sometime this year. It's very similar to Sketch and Illustrator, oops. So this is the Figma UI, and you can see it's got like very similar kind of editing capability with shortcuts and tools. It doesn't feel like using a web-based tool, and the real power with this service is that it is like Google Drive or Docs, where you can have people sharing and collaboratively editing on a document. I don't know what their pricing model is going to be like, but it's a nice tool, especially for cross-platform and team development. Oh, so actually, there's also one other thing about Figma, which is that the exporting is exported SVG is maybe a little harder to understand and work with, but you can see it looks very similar to Sketch. So I'm going to call this. Okay. There we go. Okay. So when you generate those SVG files and export them from those applications, like I showed you with Illustrator, you do get that extra cruft. So you want to optimize those and clean them up. There's a great command line tool called SVGO, and that's Node-based, and you can so Node.js based, and you can integrate that with a task runner like Gulp or Grunt. So let me show you what that looks like really quickly. So these are those SVG files that we created. So there's Adobe Illustrator. It's got that comment about Illustrator. It's got this extra XML declaration, bunch of other stuff, but it's pretty clean. And it's semantic. We got the rectangle here. Sketch, a bit deeper. It's got this description, this extra comment, and also the XML declaration. Figma, as I said, a bit more verbose, and it's also used. I'll come back to some of these other elements it has here. So with SVGO, I can just run it directly on these files. So let's start with that Illustrator file, and immediately got a 50% reduction in the file size. If I go look at it again, you can see the change, and it gets rid of the extra line breaks and white space. It's configurable. You can pass in arguments to like do or not do certain things. And if you want to know what it's doing, there's this web service called SVG OMG by Jake Archibald, and it's the same backend tool as SVGO. And let's see, let's use the Sketch SVG file. But it gives you this nice user interface. It's pretty clever. You can look at the code right here. So the original, and then there's the optimized version. Right, so you can see that it strips out the XML and the comment at the top, also the title or the description, left the title, and a few other things. So this is great to work with, kind of on a one-off basis, and especially kind of for a tutorial to understand what SVGO is doing. Remember the precision when we exported from Illustrator of the 1 decimal place, so you can change that dynamically right here. It's a very simple shape, so you're not seeing much. Yeah, I'd recommend going in and playing around with it. You can see all the different things that you can change. Here, like, really simple thing. Don't want to show the original. And where was the title? You should never remove the viewbox. That's a dangerous option. So the title right there is mushroom, or remove the title. Pretty straightforward. All right. Now where? Oh. Okay. So once you get your optimized exported SVG files, then you're going to want to put them in a website. And there's a variety of ways to do that, maybe too many ways. There's good explanations and CSS tricks that using SVG URL. Just for now, I'm going to focus on 3 approaches, and not because the object one is favored more for like animation and stuff. Iframe and embed, there's not really any particularly good reason to use those 2. Okay, so the image element is basically just like a bitmap, PNG, JPEG, whatever. So pretty straightforward. And the nice thing about using the image element is that it's going to be cached it can be cached in the browser, but it's not scriptable in the DOM. So animations have to be done within the SVG the file separately, and or any kind of like CSS changes to it. You can't manipulate the CSS from your website CSS. You have to do that right within in the SVG file itself. So you can also do SVG as background images in CSS, just like bitmaps. This is straight out of Drupal 8 core. Toolbar icon. So it's just got a nice little question mark that's being prefixed to the menu item. You can also do those as data URIs, where you actually have the SVG file right in the CSS, and this can be really kind of a quick way to tackle things for a developer. It's a bit messy though, and you have to get into you have to encode white space to do it right. You can also do this with base64, and so you can't actually read it, but there are performance drawbacks if you do that on mobile devices. There's an article on that. It's an option, can be pretty useful. And inline SVG, which is my particular favorite, is where you actually embed the SVG file in your web page. The big disadvantage of doing that is that it can't be cached by the browser, but you can work with it with JavaScript. You can style it. So those classes that we applied to those SVG paths, the shape elements, you could style and share styles across your page. And they can be animatable as well from the JavaScript. And there's a link about the performance implications of the caching too. And if you need to support IE8 and like early versions of Android, you can do that. The object element is actually pretty good for that. So if you need to do that, there are resources to support you for that. Jason Pimentel, a collaborator at Isavera, probably, did you mention Faut yesterday? So he had a session yesterday and talked about Faut, a flash of unstyled text with web fonts. SVG also has a SVG, which if you, yeah. And the way to really see it is you just disable your CSS on your site, and depending on how you export, your SVG may expand to fill your entire page, totally unlike bitmap images, and it can be like really confusing if you're trying to look at your source order. So the way around that is to include the height and width presentation attributes on your SVG, even if you're going to override them with CSS, and then those will be used to fall back. I didn't actually know that the specificity of those presentation attributes was really low. They're on par with like browser defaults. So you should do that, and so it's easier to work with your markup, and you don't get that. And there's a blog post on that too. Again, by Sarah Suwaden. So working with Drupal with SVG, I have no idea how I'm doing on my time. That clock, 10:15, is that?
I don't know where is this? You can schedule a half an hour off. 38 minutes late.
Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna keep going. I'm pretty close. So with Drupal, it's pretty straightforward, and if you open up Drupal 8 core, you can go look in these folders to see how all the new icons have been created with SVG. They're like these 16 by 16 presentation attributes, right? For the icons, they're all contained in the core Miss icons folder and also in the stable theme. These are all implemented with that CSS background. I think all of them, not sure all of them, but most of them definitely are with this as a CSS background image, just like that toolbar example. With twig templates, you can just include them, just like a PHP include previously. And there's the function to get the path for the theme. So this is in your theme, well, this isn't a theme. And then just give it the name of the file and the location. And this is actually news this week. I think, I don't remember the exact day, but there was a blocker to getting SVG support on image fields in Drupal 8 core. I'm sorry, this is the wrong slide. Well, I'll come back to that point. For Drupal 7, there is an SVG image formatter sandbox module, and you can use that. It's not a contrib like release, not even in dev. It's just a sandbox module, but that'll get you image file support in Drupal 7. And then, okay, in Drupal 8, there was an issue to upload SVG images that because they weren't .png, .gif, whatever, they weren't supported by the built-in GD image toolkit. But that blocker issue has been completed, and now they're making progress to get the support, and it's a part of the media initiative for Drupal 8.2, so pretty exciting. And then this kind of opens up this whole opportunity to have content authors upload SVG images with the kind of possibilities there, and drawbacks too. So on that point, remember when I was talking about inline SVG, that they are scriptable. Those scripts can be used for evil and cross-site scripting, malicious behaviors. There is a module SVG sanitizers for Drupal 7. I'm sure so image fields, again, they use the image element, so they're not scriptable, so that's not an issue, and that was something that underwent review in the security team. But if you're going to do inline, you might want to use this SVG, look at the SVG sanitizer. So now there's like where you start to get into the like more complicated stuff with SVG. You can do spriting. There's a tool, Grunticon, which kind of like SVGO is like I think it's a Node.js tool that can be run with Grunt. And there's also a web version called Grumpicon. Many people have used Grumpicon. All right, so Grumpicon's pretty cool. Whoops. There you go, get the magic unicorn. And you can take SVG images you can take a single image and drop it on there, and it'll generate it'll actually generate the fallback for you. But the really, I think the most useful aspect of this tool is that you can drop a whole folder of images and have it generate sprites for you. And with that Grunticon version, you can do that with your task runner. Jason?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that if you are using Grunt in your build process, you can add this into it, optimize the SVGs, and then just leave it right in your theme folder, and then you just have one folder in your source one. You drop the new icons and it just runs.
Yeah.
It's really nice. It works well.
Powered by unicorns. Very powerful. I mentioned that SVG is very accessibility friendly. So just this is a note on how to support that, especially with, well, this is for inline SVG with SVG done as an image element or CSS background. You're going to use an alt tag with an image element. It's a little different case. But if you have inline SVG, you're going to use that title element in the place of the alt attribute. And you can also use this DESC, the description element, to provide more extended. There's not really a corresponding thing in image elements. And for some screen readers, you also want to add this ARIA labeled by attribute right here that just specifies that, hey, we're using the title and DESC elements for labeling this SVG, and also specify the ARIA role. In this case, that it's an image element. Maybe you'd use also SVG to do some kind of like math equation, so you'd have the math role. There's a great post here on SitePoint that explains this in a lot of detail, and you can see all the ARIA roles if you follow off there. So I'm not going to really talk about animation. Just be aware that there's a lot of tools for it. SVG has a built-in kind of sub-syntax for animation called SMIL. It's been deprecated in Chrome for a couple of years now, so I don't know when they're actually going to stop supporting it, but there's an air of uncertainty about using SMIL. There's also GreenSock, which is a really powerful JavaScript animation tool, and allows you to do things like movie timelines and tweening. It's very powerful. Snap SVG, which I've heard described as the jQuery for SVG. Another one tool is velocity.js. And you might also want to check out this series of blog posts on the Web Animation API. Again, all these links are going to be, I'll give you the URL for the slides, and you can just click right off the slides too. So for further information, there's some great DrupalCon sessions on SVG. One at DrupalCon Barcelona, the Next Generation Graphics SVG by David Carbacho, the Flavors of SVG by John Ferris and DrupalCon LA. And Sarah Sueden has a online presentation called SVG in Motion, which gets more into the animation, but like she also covers all the different ways to embed it. She's an amazing resource on SVG. And so she wrote a chapter in this beautiful book called from Smashing Magazine, the Smashing Book 5. Chapter 4 I basically cribbed for this session. And there's an O'Reilly book, SVG Essentials, which looks pretty good. And just this week, Practical SVG was announced. It's a book apart from a list apart, and it's written by Chris Coyer, who writes CSS tricks and owns CodePen. Okay, there's a lot more resources. You might want to check out the SVG spec. Sarah Sueden, again, she's got tons of articles right on her blog. and there's an interview with the father of SVG, which is pretty interesting on the Adobe Developer Connection site, and a couple other nice SVG resources. Once you start looking, it's boundless. And there's some just cool places to like get inspired and get examples of SVG art. All right, so thank you. Here's the slides. You can access the slides from that link, and find me on Twitter or Drupal.org. I'm with Isavera. Any questions or comments? Yeah. So if you do check that responsive box, it's going to take off the height and width presentation attributes, and then you'll get that SVG effect. Yeah. So it basically, yeah, it doesn't provide a height and a width. Yeah, that effect happens with inline SVG. So if you're using them as images, it's going to use the CSS properties of the image. Yeah. Follow? Mm-hmm. What was the first one?
Okay, this is like part 2 of the talk you just heard. This is like grids of the future.
That doesn't sound, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound right to me though. Would it render as a bitmap right in the browser? Right. Yeah, I haven't tested that. I hadn't heard that. But it's still an SVG file. Yeah.
There's going to be trade-offs in terms of, like, maybe it's one less HTTP request, but it's also then a larger download on pages that aren't using it. So you have to kind of decide.
Yeah, you start to get into a lot of trade-offs with performance, and you have to kind of exercise your judgment. One thing to note with HTTP 2, the number of requests is less of a performance impact. So that might be something worth considering too. Any more questions?
So one program that always impressed me as being decades ahead of its time was Xfig. Of course, it was Unix only. I wonder if you're familiar with that and whether the current generation of drawing programs are actually strictly better than Xfig was 20 or 30 years ago.
Not familiar with it, and so do you have an opinion? It sounds like you do. It's better.
I played with Inkscape a few years ago when, as you said, it was still sort of wonky on a Mac.
Yeah.
That's something I compared it to. And
Inkscape is probably the most modern drawing application out there commercially, in that it was only developed within the last few years, so it has very little legacy junk in it. That's probably the one that you would want to use as a standard of comparison to see, but I'm not familiar with that one either. So.
It probably also depends on what you're trying to do. Like the SVG edit app and Inkscape too, I think when you start to get into working with the pens and manipulating those, the handles, and like having support like alignment grids and snap and all the kinds of things you take for granted with something like Illustrator, that may, as an illustrator or a designer, that may be more valuable to you. So the ones that I gave examples for are really good at providing that kind of capability. So it kind of maybe it depends on what you're trying to do with it too. Any other questions? All right, I think we're good. Cool.